Hi, my name is Amy Hopkins, president of the Parrot Club, and I'd like to welcome you to our May 2025 talk. We're very excited tonight to have Dr. Jason Crean with us talking about avian nutrition myth busting. Dr. Crean specializes in raw whole food nutrition and dietary enrichment for parrots, and has interesting and novel ideas about how to keep our birds happy and healthy. Dr. Crean is a biologist, an avid aviculturist, and professor in the Department of Biological Science at Saint Xavier University. He often speaks to avicultural groups across the country and acts as consultant to zoos and other institutions, particularly when it comes to animal nutrition and biologically appropriate enrichment. He currently teaches courses like zoo biology, animal nutrition, behavior, and diagnostics, and animal nutrition, where he's also co-director of the Animal Nutrition Laboratory, which has a special interest in avian nutrition. Dr. Crean has been awarded the Presidential Award for Excellence in Science Teaching, the highest award a teacher can receive in the U.S., by President Obama in 2009, the 2010 Leadership in Science Education Prize by the American Association for the Advancement of Science, as well as awards from the National Science Teachers Association, National Association of Biology Teachers, the Illinois Science Teachers Association, and others. Most recently, he was awarded the 2016 Golden Apple Award for Excellence in Teaching, as well as the 2020 Distinguished Teaching Award by the National Science Teaching Association. He currently resides in Orlando, where he manages his aviary with species of toucans, fruit doves, crowned pigeons, tanagers, waxbills, partridges, and more, including his sidekick, a black palm cockatoo named Sirius. And if that last name sounds familiar, he also has a Biology of Magical Creatures site of Harry Potter biology at his website, which I found very fun and interesting to write. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Crean.
Thank you, Amy. You did not have to read all of that. All of that means I'm too stupid to say no, basically. Welcome everybody. I'm really pleased to be here. Anytime I can talk about feeding our birds and improving their lives, I am all for it. Amy just mentioned my sidekick, Sirius Black, who is there pictured on your screen. And some of what I'm going to talk about tonight actually is on there. Some of us were talking before the recording started about, oh, it's just a treat, or, oh, it's just a little, if it's an unhealthy food. And there's really no room for that when it comes to birds that have very small body masses. So there's no such thing as moderation when it comes to unhealthy foods. So we're going to talk about some of the myths that I'm sure most of you or all of you have heard at some point. There's a lot perpetuated because people have heard things once or twice and they carry that on as fact and pass that information on to others. So I put this talk together because we were hearing a lot of these things. So as Amy said, I teach at university. I teach many courses, 200, 300 level courses in our Department of Biology. And two of the courses that I designed and got approved through the university are Zoo Bio, which has elements of animal nutrition. Students actually learn about the effects of processing when it comes to ultra processed foods, for example, dog and cat kibble, pellets, and things like that we think are healthy, but really should be fed at a minimum, if at all. And an introduction to animal nutrition is a course that's solely about that. And the students in that course actually design diets around their own pets, the animals that they keep. And a couple of years ago, we launched the Animal Nutrition Lab, named after my late parents. And we are currently generating funding. We have done some preliminary studies, but funding for bird nutrition is non-existent. Most of the bird nutrition funding that is research that has been funded is funded by pet food companies who are funding their own research, which is biased. or has the great potential for bias. So we're trying to provide a more well-rounded, diverse perspective on what's best for our animals, in particular birds. I have a podcast that's on YouTube, and that's called Go Wild. I co-host it with researcher Dr. Evie Vultura, who has published papers on alternative foodstuffs and the other things that parrots eat in the wild that we often don't consider. One of the recent episodes I did was with Dr. Jamie Abedi, who's an avian veterinarian in Niles, Illinois, and we talk a lot about the deficiencies she sees, whether birds are on a pellet diet or not. She sees deficiencies regardless. So we talk a lot about that, so you should check that out. There's several episodes available on YouTube. So when I talk about whole food, I talk about diversity. I always want my birds guessing. I don't want them to sit and expect or become dependent upon certain foods. I want them to get a novel mix of things every day so that they're not as stubborn. A lot of birds become stubborn because we cave and let them eat their favorite foods all the time. And then, food is love in some cases. So we tend to do that. We're all guilty of it at some point, I'm sure. But I really want birds to not know what's coming. And so they're more apt to change. They're more apt to try new things on a given day. So these are just sample bowls of whole leafy greens and peppers, melons with the seeds, papaya with the seeds, peppers with the seeds, some citrus with the seeds, and then among other things. And I try to grow things, which is nice. I grew up in Chicago, and I was there for 47 years before I finally escaped the winters and came down to Florida. And now I can grow lots of things like what you see on the right there, which is mint and gooseberries and blueberries and edible flowers like nasturtiums, for example. So I want to diversify as much as I can and give birds as much exposure to different shapes, tastes, colors, textures, like they would see in the wild. And when a bird goes to look for food, they don't know what they're going to find. But parrots are opportunistic, so they take advantage of whatever they can find, and they're amazingly adept at extracting the nutrient from whatever they eat. So we can take advantage of that by offering them a lot of great food. This is my aviary right beyond the pool area there. It's 800 square feet, and I keep about 40 different species there. And inside I have a heavily planted aviary, and I'm feeding a lot of different birds in here. So I have to diversify the diet for whatever I'm feeding. This is usually the view when I walk in each morning. The fruit doves are all perched there, not patiently waiting for me. They land on the bowls and immediately start eating the blueberries before I even put the bowls down. But it's interesting to see what their favorite foods are. Different birds have different tastes, and that probably mirrors what they've adapted to eat in the wild. So this is the typical morning. I do a lot of food prep. Diced fruits, all the frugivores that I have get at least 12 different types of fruits per day. I do throw in chunks of things as well so that they have to work at it, like banana and citrus. They get wheatgrass and microgreens and sprouts as well, but different types of bowls for different types of species. So I have a lot of columbids, which are doves and pigeons. That's a triangular spotted dove. I have a lot of different types of finches and tanagers. This is a Sulawesi ground dove. And sorry, my face is over this picture. There we go. Pink-headed fruit dove. Waxbills like these strawberry finches, Australian finches like owl finches, and tanagers, more green-winged doves, red-crested cardinals. These are my crown pigeons. So lots of different birds, from tiny little birds to really big turkey-sized birds like these crown pigeons. So I have to diversify the food so that they have many different places to go and they have a lot of choice. But I have to also measure how much is eaten by the flock at a certain point a day so that they are eating the diversity that I'm offering. And I'll talk about that like when it comes to your birds. I also breed 2 species of toucans. These are green arasaris. And you can see when I'm weaning them, they get a lot of different types of fruits. I want them exposed to everything I can put in front of them. And the female on the left is colored out, and you can see the chick in the middle, which is about 7 weeks old there, is not colored out. And toucans don't produce down feathers, so they're never fluffy. They're never fuzzy. Their feathers just come right through their skin. It's got to itch. They look itchy when they're moving around. And then I breed group-bill toucanettes. I'm one of a few breeders in the country that have these. The first successful breeding took place last year. I missed it by 3 weeks. I was the second to breed them in the country, but they're phenomenal little birds. Kind of sun conure size, and then their beak is about the length of their body as well. So they're really neat little birds. So working with toucans in the 90s actually is what kind of got me interested in nutrition and looking more closely, because toucans, as well as lories and some other birds, are prone to iron storage disease. And that's where the iron gets stored in the liver and they can't process it, they can't metabolize it, and it ends up killing them. And so I had a green arasari, a pet green arasari that was named Cricket, and she started showing symptoms, and I took her to my friend, Dr. Karen Becker, who's, if you're not following Dr. Karen Becker, she's the most followed veterinarian on the planet right now. You should follow her. She's a wealth of information, but typically within 6 months, birds die of hemochromatosis, which is iron storage disease. But we kept Cricket alive through her treatment for 3.5 years beyond her diagnosis. So it was a big success. And what we did was twofold. She did some phlebotomy where she drew blood, but then we introduced tea. And the tannins in the tea helped bind to the iron and keep it out of the body. And that's where I also got into tea. So I'll talk about tea a little bit tonight as well, and the many benefits that teas can offer our birds. So good nutrition is the foundation of wellness. What you put in is what you get out. Whole food is always going to be the best choice when it comes to optimal nutrition, because the nutrients that are present in the whole food are accompanied by other chemical compounds that help absorb the food and assimilate it. Where if you're taking a vitamin that's isolated, which is what you'd find in something like pellets, it's not as bioavailable to the body. It's not as absorbable by the body, because all of those accessory compounds that help absorb and use those nutrients are not there. So whole food is always going to be the best choice when it comes to optimal nutrition. Now, there's a lot of myths, and social media has only made this worse, obviously. If you're on social media for 3 seconds, you realize that there's a lot of people who are acting like experts that are not experts. But nutrition is very complicated. It's a complicated science. There's no easy or simple way to feed the birds that we keep. And so diversifying the nutrients that we offer is really key. But we are told, and some of you are probably from the cereal generation, where on Saturday morning you were eating your cereal watching cartoons. We were told that if you just had 1 bowl of total cereal, that's all you needed for the whole day, right? And I was walking around as an 8-year-old saying the words riboflavin and niacin because that was on the cereal box. And unfortunately, we were indoctrinated to think that, you could get all your nutrients from this one food. And unfortunately, that is filtered over to pets and, dog and cat kibbles, which are incredibly unhealthy regardless of what the label says. And a lot of the ultra processed bird pellets have a multivitamin, which is basically the same multivitamin that we used to put in birds' water that was like turned it yellow, or the powdered vitamin that you sprinkle on their food. It's basically the same thing. It's just on a hunk of something like wheat or corn or soy or, some kind of carrier. So it's just a different way to deliver it. So unfortunately, it's complicated, but those nutrients, the best way to deliver those nutrients is through actual food that looks like food. There is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all diet. There's no such thing as a quote complete diet. Every time I see that on a bag of pet food, I cringe. There is no such thing as a complete diet, especially for the huge variation of birds that we're feeding. Even birds that live within the same region are different species are eating different things. So it's that idea that one food is complete for all of them is really a misnomer. It's false. We also have a lot of problems with myths because there's a misunderstanding of how foods are processed in our bodies, how they're metabolized, how the nutrients are actually uptake and used in the body. And the concept of toxicity is also interesting because a lot of people will immediately say that a food that they think is bad is toxic, and that's not true for most of the cases. There's very few exceptions to that rule. A lot of this stems from a lack of understanding science, and as Amy explained, I have one foot in the biology, the science world, and one foot in the science education world. And I know that we weren't taught science the right way. We were taught science as memorizing facts and vocabulary words, spitting it out on paper, and then we didn't remember it. And so, unfortunately, that is the bulk of how people are exposed to science. And then we wonder why we live in a scientifically illiterate society. So I have a foot in each of those worlds, and we are working to change that so that kids are learning science by figuring it out instead of just learning about science facts. And we're making headway. I wrote a curriculum a few years back, and it's used in all 50 states and at least 19 countries now, because teachers are finally seeing like, oh, my students can do more of this, and that helps them make better decisions as adults. So we're constantly looking at the process of science and how we can get that across to people. People tend to spread what makes sense to them. And if they think, oh, apple seeds are toxic, I heard that once, that makes sense to me, I'm going to spread that and say that apple seeds are toxic, and even one is going to kill your bird, and you should bring it to an emergency vet if you think they ate one, and on and on and on. When in reality, they would have to eat a lot of those apple seeds to have any ill effects. A lot of what birds eat in the wild is toxic, but they've evolved and adapted to consume those things without any ill effects, or they consume things that help them detoxify. So we can also mirror that in our homes when we take care of these birds. And a lot of social media comments lack expertise. It's really hard for me to just pass by when I see these comments that are just outright false. A lot of it's based on emotion over science, over facts, and that's very problematic. But there's a lot of confirmation bias out there where someone will say, oh, see, I'm right, and show this one thing, and that's not how science works. So the best thing we can do is open our minds and think about anytime something's presented to us, how can we use that information, and how can we check it? How can we look more deeply into it to see if it's correct or not? So when I do this talk, I always say my goal is not to shame. You're going to see things here that you probably believe or you probably used to believe, and that's okay. Like this whole thing is about education. So my goal is never to shame. It's only to help improve the lives of birds, which is what I've devoted my life to. The internet and social media are full of false information about bird diets. A lot of it is driven by pet food manufacturers who are trying to sell a product. Obviously, we see a lot of that. I just saw not long ago a commercial from a dog food company that said, we're fighting pet cancer. I'm like, well, you're causing pet cancer and then you're fighting it. Like, this doesn't make any sense. So, there's a lot of gimmicks out there when it comes to this, but I want to see, if I have food in my hand, I want to see that it's food. I can tell that it's food by looking at it, and not something that's been processed and put through all these different processes to get them, added sugar and salts and things like that just to get the birds to eat it. So bad information often starts with my bird loves. I love chocolate cake. I should not be eating it every day. So plain and simple, my bird loves does not mean it's healthy. It might mean the opposite. Okay. I have fed blank for a long time and never had a problem. Every time I see this, and I see this almost daily on social media, I see this and I think of Alex the African Gray from Irene Pepperberg's lab. She didn't know that he had the health problems that he did. And then, suddenly passed away without any warning or symptoms. So just because you don't see any symptoms doesn't mean that there's not underlying health issues that aren't even detectable necessarily through blood work. So, you know, just because you haven't had a problem doesn't mean you can't do better for your bird. I heard that blank is bad for birds. I heard that. I see that all the time. Like, where did you hear it? If somebody just said it because they want to say it, or they heard it too, it's like the game of telephone. I'm sure all of you have played the game of telephone, and by the time it gets to the last person, it just doesn't make sense. So I heard that blank is bad for birds. You need to look into that. You need to check. And anybody that speaks in absolutes, like birds should never or always have, you need to take that with a grain of salt, no pun intended, but you really should think about, like, what does this mean? Birds should never or always have. What does it really mean? Now, are there things that birds should never have? Yes. Avocados are an obvious one, and it's not because they're unhealthy, because birds in the wild eat them. It's because we pick them before they're ripe, and the toxin that's in the flesh that would normally recede doesn't, because it extends their shelf life. But, you know, unfortunately, we can't feed avocados. Do all avocados have the toxin in their flesh? Probably not, but do you want to risk it? No. So I always say, even though birds are eating them in the wild, we really should avoid that. And it's a shame, because avocados are one of the healthiest fruits out there. But when it comes to, you know, feeding something like that, you just avoid it. But when you hear people say never or always, you really gotta look into that and say, is this really true? So what birds really eat in the wild really looks nothing like what we typically feed them. On the left is an Australian mix that I freeze dry myself. And we sell that for foraging. And what you see there are gum nuts and the bottle brush pods, eucalyptus pods. The spiky thing is a casuarina pod or cone, eucalyptus leaves, and some other things. And those are all things that parrots eat in the wild, Australian birds eat in the wild. Dwi is in the middle, and she is part of the Indonesian Parrot Project. I work with her and Bonnie Zimmerman, and I get nuts imported from them that they're actually feeding the birds, because the birds eat them in the wild, and then I pay for them, so that goes right into their conservation fund. So it's a wonderful relationship, but it really is nice to hear, what are these birds eating in the wild? How often are they eating them? In what form are they eating them? Are they ripe? Are they unripe? That type of thing. And you can see there, she's got bananas and papaya and some other things there. Lots of diversity, and especially when it comes to eclectus, like giving them a whole food diet is really critical, and that's what she's holding there. And then on the right, that's more of the Australian blend. I call that the Australian blend 2, TOO, like cockatoo, because there's some larger things like those big cones or Banksia pods, larger eucalyptus pods and eucalyptus leaves, bottle brush, things like that. And so birds are consuming these things, and they don't look a whole lot like what we normally are feeding. This is my Australian blend here. You can see some of those components that I just talked about. And at the bottom center, you'll see that round cone. And that round cone has these little tiny seeds that have little wings on them. And you can see, relative to my hand, there's just a huge pile of them, and they're very, very tiny. And big cockatoos are consuming those. My black palm will work at one of those and just peel it until he gets all those little tiny seeds out. So a lot of the times when I'm recommending different types of seeds as part of a diet, people are like, well, my macaw's not going to eat these seeds, these tiny seeds, or my cockatoo's not going to eat these tiny seeds. And I'm like, this is what they eat in the wild. They actually eat these, and they eat smaller seeds. The tiny seeds that come out of those, that roll towards the bottom there, those are from bottle brush. The tiny seeds, it almost looks like dust. I mean, they're little tiny specks like salt, and they eat those. They consume those too. So they eat very small seeds. These are wing seeds from the Hakea pods, which are up here at the top of the picture, or the top of that clump of things. They kind of look like almonds, but these are the small wing seeds that that they eat from those. And there's only one of those inside of the husk. So they do a lot of work for a very little amount of food. This is the beak of a glossy black cockatoo, big bird. And it's eating one of those casuarina cones, those little round cones. And it's basically just pulling all the little pieces apart so that it can get to the tiny seeds inside. And this is what they do. This is why these birds have these big muscular tongues that can manipulate the smallest thing and extract seeds. And this is what they've evolved for countless generations to do. So we want to mirror this as best we can and diversify the diet. These are my two Go Wild blends. And what I did a few years ago was I started formulating mixes that had actual components from the wild. So they're in these pictures, you'll see big pods like tamarind pods, which they eat in the wild. The different types of nuts, like the round nut that looks scaly towards the middle of the big picture here, that's a rattan nut. The triangular, the three-lobed seed pod there, that's Pautera from South America. You'll see macaws and conures eating that, Pionis. Matamba nuts, I just thought I saw it. This is like Where's Waldo? Trying to find these things. But up here, that's a canary nut. These are smaller rattan nuts, which are these on the stem here. These are all things that parrots are eating in the wild. So we want to mirror what they're eating and try to give them the very best nutrients from these whole foods. And so when I bag these up, I've gotten a lot of feedback from clients that buy these and they're like, what is this? Because my bird went right for it. I'm like, that's a rattan nut and you have a cockatoo. So that makes total sense, So they're seeing these things, probably how UV light reflects off of them. Like they've evolved to do this. So we want to give them as much as possible. Also, alternative foodstuffs that we don't normally associate as food. Bark, for example. So I put in coconut husk, cinnamon, Ceylon cinnamon bark, pine and birch bark, willow bark, things like that. Roots, we do turmeric and ginger and things like that because we know birds will eat roots. We're trying to mirror and mimic what their ancestral diet is as best we can. And what they drink in the wild is not purified water. They do not drink a Brita filter, drink from a Brita filter in the rainforest. They drink from these rain catches. They drink from puddles. I'm sure you've seen birds in your neighborhood drinking from puddles that are full of leaves and it turns the water dark because of the tannins. This is what birds have been accustomed to drinking. So offering tea will help mirror this and actually help detox and help support detoxification in the liver, among a host of other different types of things, depending on what you're steeping. So some myths, let's get into it. First one, I hear all the time, the seed is bad. Seed is not bad. Seed by nature has to be nutrient dense because that seed needs enough energy to grow into a plant until it can grow leaves and do photosynthesis for itself. So by nature, seeds are nutritious. Often now, and I diversify the seeds. So you shouldn't buy a seed mix that's like all sunflower seeds. That's problematic. But sunflower seeds are healthy. They are, just a few sunflower seeds here and there, or just using them during training or using them when you're having some direct contact with your bird, whatever it is, that's fine. But they do not need a bowl full of sunflower seeds. Typically, especially in the US, we think if a little is good, a lot must be better. Not good. That's not good at all. So just because something's good doesn't mean that you can offer tons of it. So sunflower, loaded with nutrients. Sunflower seeds are loaded with nutrients. They're a health food for people. They tell you to eat them, right? But should your bird be eating dozens of them every day or in a week? No, they don't need it. So a couple here and there are great, but you don't need to overdo it. The picture on the left is one of the seed mixes that I make. It's bagged. Yeah, it's right behind me here in these bags. This is what I do. And I want birds to be as engaged in their foraging as possible for as long as possible. So you'll see I have whole seed heads, whole grain heads, whole flowers, whole nuts, whole seeds. So they're really having to work for their food. And there's a lot going on in here. So every spoonful that you take out of here to give to your bird is going to be potentially a different mix than the previous spoonful. So diversifying and keeping them more engaged is really, really important. But when you look at the seeds that I just pulled from the bottom, millets are starchy, they're protein rich, great source of phosphorus and calcium. Canary grass And honestly, canary grass, like every bird, every parrot should have canary grass as part of their diet, no matter, what type of bird. But they're rich in protein, healthy fats, really important. You cannot get a healthy fat in any product that has been heat processed. So most pellets, you cannot get a healthy fat. And omega-3 fatty acids denature at room temperature. So you really can't get that in any pellet. You need to supplement the diet with something much better. So different types of seeds like ground flax, chia, hemp, things like that are really, really beneficial when it comes to omega-3s, as are some tree nuts like walnuts, pecans, filberts, pine nuts, things like that. And then grains like buckwheat and barley also have a lot of benefits, and soaking them and even sprouting them gives you a different set of nutrients. So you can offer some of these dry, and then you can soak and sprout them and give them a whole different set of nutrients. Nuts are bad. I hear this all the time. There was a post going around social media a few years ago from a vet that said there's no reason birds need tree nuts, and I just cringed because I'm like, that's what they eat. Like they need tree nuts. So there's a lot of healthy tree nuts that they can have, and they're pictured here. And anything that's above pistachio is typically what we want to offer in, here and there to round out the diet, for example. So pecans and walnuts are going to be your best nuts. Walnuts are really the best. A walnut a day keeps the doctor away. I think walnuts have a lot of really a lot of health benefits when it comes to healthy fats, proteins, fiber, which fiber is critically important for the microbiome and keeping that gut bacteria healthy, and because that's connected to pretty much every body system and that a bird or human has. Hazelnuts, which are filberts, are great. Brazil nuts here and there, they only need a little bit of that. A little bit goes a long way. Almonds, no omega-3s to speak of really, so they're not the best nut, but they also have other health benefits. So an almond here and there is fine. A pistachio here and there is fine. Cashew here and there is fine, but really focusing on those nuts at the top are really important. Now, when I show this data table here, you'll notice that all the bold numbers, which are the higher values, are not found within any one nut, right? So you see all these nuts have different benefits. They have a different reason for eating them. So for example, almonds have higher protein load than other nuts. So that's a really good reason to feed an almond. But if you want a better fat quality, you'll look at macadamia nuts, or you'll look at pecans, or you'll look at walnuts. Those have high values, but the balance between the fats is better. So what does this tell us? It tells us that we should be offering a little bit of everything so that they get all of these different nutrients in better quantities. Fruits are bad. There's been a big move against fruits, saying, they're all sugar and they're bad. But what happens is we tend to hyper-focus on one quality of a food and completely ignore all of the other benefits. I just saw somebody post something about grapes saying they're sugar bombs. They're all sugar. Well, grapes are loaded with all kinds of things. And the darker the grape, the more benefit, because they're higher in bioflavonoids, for example. So it's really important that you are not looking at just the single element of a whole food. You're looking at what is everything it brings. Should birds eat a whole clump of grapes in a day? No. Would some birds do that if you let them? Yes. But you don't have to let them do that. So a grape or two here and there are totally fine. They're not going to hurt your bird. But you can also make better choices if you're worried about too much sugar, and you can offer foods that are less ripe. So bananas are a really great example. I only feed green bananas. I only eat green bananas myself because they're higher in fiber, prebiotic fiber, which helps fuel that microbiome in the gut. And you're going to have higher fiber and less sugar the less ripe it is. And that goes for mangoes, and it goes for papayas and things like that. So if you're worried about sugar, let's say you have a bird with fatty liver disease and you're trying to limit how much sugar they get, just feed less ripe, but there's no reason to stop feeding fruit. Fruit has a lot of benefits, even if it's selectively bred to be sweeter through agricultural practices, there's still benefits to all the fruits that we have. I always say berries are pretty much your go-to. Berries are rich in fiber, they're high in bioflavonoids, which gives them that really strong color, and those are antioxidants. So berries are always a good choice. Just diversify the berries as best you can. But also, offering things that are more fibrous, like the fruits that I mentioned before, like unripe banana and mango and papaya, things like that. I hear mushrooms are bad. Toxic, if a mushroom is poisonous, hopefully you're not eating it. And hopefully you wouldn't feed it to your bird either. Poisonous mushrooms are bad. Like you don't eat poisonous mushrooms. If you take anything from my talk tonight, don't eat poisonous mushrooms. But when it comes to birds eat mushrooms in the wild. These macaws here are eating, they're in the Pantanal in Brazil. They're actually eating mushrooms right off the side of a tree. Mushrooms have a lot of benefits, especially if you're buying fresh mushrooms or growing them yourself. You can buy these kits like with lion's mane, shiitake, reishi, things like that. And if they're exposed to sunlight, they actually produce a form of vitamin D that birds can use. So the mix on the right there is what I call my forest foraging. And that has dried mushrooms, and those woody strips are actually from reishi mushrooms. There's maitake in the middle, and turkey tail, which are the flakes at the end here. And then I add in whole ginger root and some bamboo stems, a chunk of cork bark with lichens on it, tamarind pod, pine cone. These are the typical things that, like, these are similar to what birds are going to be eating, and they're not going to hurt them. So anytime I can diversify and get them eating different textures, and just even if they're just foraging through it and moving things around, that's a win. Even if they're not actually consuming them. But yeah, mushrooms, edible mushrooms are just fine. Oops. Pellets have everything a bird needs. Definitely not true. Any bag that claims to be a complete diet means that it was tested on chickens generally, and that was enough to keep them alive for a few months. And having had chickens, I know, like, they'll eat anything and stay alive. So, not really the best comparison. But anything that claims to be a complete diet is resoundingly false. On the right there, on the left, you see palm nuts. This is a freeze-dried mix that I usually do over the summer. But there's freeze-dried palm nuts in there, and a lot of birds eat palm nuts all over the world. A lot of parrots are consuming palm nuts in some form. So those palm nuts are freeze-dried, as I also have pomegranate in there. The strip thing at the bottom of the picture is a jicama root, really rich in fiber, crunchy. They really seem to get into that. Some plantain and bananas with the peel on there. I freeze-dry all of that and offer it to birds. The second picture there is a typical bowl I would give Sirius, my cockatoo. He gets wheatgrass and microgreens and pea pods and peppers. There's some cranberries in there. I quarter Brussels sprouts. I think Brussels sprouts are an underappreciated vegetable when it comes to our birds, because a lot of them like to peel them, and they can peel and peel and peel all the way down to nothing. Peppers, especially with the peel, with the seeds, are really well liked. So, and then sprouts. I offer sprouts every day to all of my parrots and most of my other birds that aren't frugivorous. So lots of diversity, lots of different things that they have choices for, but all within a portion size, so I know how much they're eating and what they're eating. One of the studies that came out in recent years was called Nature Calls Intelligence and Natural Foraging Style Predicts Poor Welfare in Captive Parrots. And what they did was they looked at parrots and their overall lifestyle for a long period of time. And what they found was that, quote, results suggest that more naturalistic diets would improve welfare, and that intelligent citizens need increased cognitive stimulation. This means that parrots spend most of their days foraging. And when we bring them into our homes, we rob them of that because we conveniently put their food into a little bowl and that's all they need, right? And what they found was birds that were eating and filling up on pellets didn't take advantage of any diverse diets. They were done with their food very quickly compared to birds that had whole food diets who spent a lot of time foraging. I'm working on a documentary film through my day job on zoo science, and I interviewed one of the leading gorilla biologists in the world. And they talked about how they took their gorillas off of pellets completely because they were having heart issues and had high inflammation markers. And what they found was when they took them off of pellets and they put them on all whole food, that not only did the inflammation decrease significantly, but they also saw them foraging twice as much during the day. So they were engaged more with their food. They weren't bored. They weren't just sitting around. They were actually foraging more because they were eating all these different types of foods and were more engaged with their diet. And this is what this paper describes when it comes to parrots. Parrots get bored easily. You know this, right? They get into trouble because we're not engaging them enough. So if we can give them lots of foraging opportunities with as diverse a diet as possible, that's best. But anytime I hear someone say, we got to feed 70 to 80% of this one thing because this has everything in it, no, that is resoundingly false. I just completely disagree with that. And this is one of the papers that talks about why we really need to diversify the diet and give them more natural diets instead of processed foods. So a couple of things we do. We get these things that we know birds eat. Now, this is a eucalyptus pod, and I know some of you are like, I don't think blue and gold macaws are from Australia. And they're not. But this is a blue and gold macaw in Australia, and this bird's owner gives them all of this different foraging from the wild. And they love it. They go crazy for it. So just because the bird's not from there doesn't mean that they can't take advantage of it. And they love tearing apart these eucalyptus pods. They love tearing apart the bristle pod, sorry. It's been a long day. The bottle brush pods and things like that. And then these two lovely ladies on the right are, on the left is Marlene, and Marlene is the mother of Caroline, and that's Dr. Caroline Evstethian. Dr. Caroline Evstethian runs the Avian Preservation and Education Conservancy, known as APEC. They have conservation breeding programs that are working, and she's also traveled around the world to help people stop poaching parrots and help them find other ways to live instead of relying on income from illegally smuggling parrots. And what her mom does for us is she is our bird bouquet beautician. And so she designs these. These are all edible. Everything on that bouquet is edible. It's untreated. It's not colored. They're all naturally dried. And we have found that hanging these in or out of the cage and letting the birds just forage and tear them apart has been amazingly helpful with some birds. And so that's one way that you can diversify by giving them whole food items that are in a form like this where they have to work for it. So some of the vitamins the synthetic vitamins that are added to pellets or added to these other things are not as available as the vitamins and such in whole food. So one paper found in the journal Nutrients, although synthetic and food-derived vitamin C is chemically identical, fruit and vegetables are rich in numerous nutrients and phytochemicals which may influence its bioavailability. What that means is, even though the vitamin C that you take in a pill form or that's in a pellet is chemically the same as what is in vitamin C, like in an orange, for example, what you're missing are all the compounds that are in that whole food that help it work. And when you isolate it, it's not as effective. And that's what this study describes. Conventional research attempts to focus on single factor determinants, and even though the question or problem being addressed is multifaceted. Now, when I talked about earlier, hyper focusing on the sugar in fruit and ignoring all of the other benefits, that's what this is saying. A lot of the research is looking at one piece instead of holistically. And that is problematic. And so when we look at whole food as being the best option, it's because it doesn't have just that isolated vitamin. It has all of these different compounds that help things work in the body, whether it makes them less, more absorbable by the body or easy to use in the body. It's that synergy, how all those chemicals work together in the food that we eat. So synergism, how those compounds work together in whole food, make the food more accessible, make the nutrients more accessible to the animals. Birds need all of their nutrients every day. False. This is absolutely false. You do not eat all of your vitamin A every day. No one is eating 100% of their beta carotene every single day. They're eating it on a Thursday, and then they're good for a few days, and then they eat some more. That's exactly how birds operate. Birds will gorge themselves when things are in season. For example, these palm nuts ripening here, those Quaker parrots are all over them. And then as soon as that's done, they move on to another food that has a completely different nutrient profile. So the idea that birds have to get all of their nutrients every single day or they're going to die or they're going to have deficiencies is just totally false. And what is interesting about what you see here is you see Quaker parrots here in Florida eating those palm nuts. You see a Puerto Rican parrot at the bottom and on Puerto Rico eating palm nuts. You see a Senegal in Africa eating palm nuts. So there's these different species of palms, but they're all eating these for the same reasons. They're nutrient rich, great fatty acids, high in beta carotene because it gives them their color. So they're all eating these and making these choices for a reason. But once that season's over, they then move on to other foods and eat those. And sometimes it's months before they get something else. Some trees in the rainforest, especially in Asia, they bloom every 3 years. And everybody descends upon it. They eat it, and then they move on to something else until that comes back in 3 more years. So this idea that we have to somehow micromanage the diet and make sure they get every little thing every single day is just false. It's just not reality. Fresh foods are dangerous. I've heard this from vets say, fresh foods are going to kill your birds, though I can't find a vet who will tell me, yes, I definitively found that this bird died because it ate sprouts. It's not like that. So accelerated spoilage of fresh foods is a myth. You can leave fresh foods out during the day. They're not going to go bad unless you're in 95-degree weather outside in Florida, where things tend to go, tend to go bad faster. But whole food typically does not go bad as fast as cooked foods. Cooked foods, we've destroyed their natural plant defenses. Plants grow outside. They grow outside. They don't get moldy because they grow outside and they have natural plant defenses. Versus cooked foods where we've destroyed their cell walls by cooking them and then they go bad much faster. And so when you look at the red box here on the graph, it shows you even within 24 hours, you do not see a lot of bacterial growth, regardless of how the food was treated, whether it was soaked, these are sprouts, whether it was soaked in tap water, distilled water, or any of these other types of antibiotics. You don't see a ton of growth and there's not much difference between them. So leaving it while you're at work, though you should typically leave enough that they're going to eat within a few hours, but leaving food out in your home is not typically going to cause problems. This quote on the right came out of a Bird Talk magazine before it folded again. And I read this and just about screamed. I was like, what? Like, just feeding pellets and small amounts of fresh food? How boring, first of all, to the bird's mind, right? Like giving them the same food as most of their diets and only small amounts of fresh food is absolutely ridiculous. And if you want useful calcium, you give them whole food that's going to give them useful calcium. If you want vitamin A, you give them foods that are rich in beta carotene so they can do vitamin A. But this idea, unfortunately, is perpetuated by some veterinarians because they don't get any education when it comes to parrot nutrition. One of my friends that's a vet looked at me and said, well, what do we get, a day of parrot nutrition? And all it is just feed them pellets. We don't get a nutrition, we don't get a well-rounded education when it comes to feeding nutrition. So it's, in vet school. So it's really important that we are giving our birds a whole food diet, lots of different things so that they don't get bored and they get nutrients that can actually be taken up and used by the body. Cooked foods are better than raw. That's false. There are a couple of exceptions where lightly steaming sweet potato makes it more bioavailable. Boiling corn to some extent will make it more bioavailable, but there's very few, and both of those can be fed raw. So it's like you don't have to cook them at all. But cooked foods are going to spoil much faster at room temperature. You know this if you've had bread in a bag. It can go bad very quickly if there's any air in the bag whatsoever because it's cooked. Rice in particular is dangerous. Cooked rice is dangerous. I don't recommend feeding cooked rice to any birds. I recommend sprouting rice if you're going to feed rice, but not cooking it, because after only 2 hours at room temperature, rice can develop a bacteria called Bacillus Sirius, and that causes death in people. They call it Chinese food syndrome. People that have eaten, leftovers that weren't refrigerated after a few hours, it's that quick. So, I don't recommend any kind of cooked foods for birds. The Association of Avian Veterinarians put out this notice last year saying, you really shouldn't be giving your birds warm or mushy foods. It tends to trigger hormones and things like that. Like, it's really not necessary. Even though your birds may like them, it doesn't mean that it's good for them. So, offering whole food in the way raw whole foods is really the best way to do it. And when you look at other processed foods like breads and pastas and things like that, we know those aren't good for us. Like, we know they're not, but offering them to our birds is problematic too. So there's really no reason to offer pasta, whether it's dry or cooked. It's really important that you're offering whole foods so that when you look at it, this is a whole food. Tea is bad for birds. I hear this a lot. Caffeinated tea is bad for birds. You probably shouldn't be offering that. But anything that's organically decaffeinated is appropriate for birds. There's a huge amount of teas, and really, and I can come back someday and do a tea talk for y'all. But when it comes to tea, there's only one plant that has caffeine that's problematic, and that's the camellia plant. And that gives us green tea and black tea and white tea and oolong tea. And I'm sure most of you have had green or black tea. Down here in Florida, everybody drinks tea, iced tea. So we're, big tea drinkers. And I only drink water and tea. That's all I drink. And that has a lot of benefits. But the teas that I offer to birds and formulate for birds are naturally decaffeinated, which means organically decaffeinated. And that means that they don't use any chemicals to decaffeinate the tea. They use water and carbon dioxide. And so that's really important. But all of the other teas, chamomile, calendula, lavender, jasmine, the jasmine flowers here, rose hips, hibiscus, red clover, raspberry leaf, all of these other teas are naturally caffeine-free, totally safe. It is important which ones can be problematic. All of the tea formulations that I do are made specifically for birds so that they're not getting too much of something that could be problematic if offered too much. Even lavender is high in coumarines, which are blood thinners. So offering them just pure lavender tea, not the best thing, but lavender as part of a tea blend is really good and very calming to the birds. So definitely a lot of benefits to the different types of teas. Now, too much of any one food item is problematic. It doesn't matter how healthy it is. So portion sizes matter. Unfortunately, we think a lot of food is love, and that can be problematic. I see parrotlets that are this big sitting on 2 cups of food, like they're not going to eat that much. So I typically go with the tablespoon method as the foundation. That means this is where I start. I make sure that they're eating the diversity that I'm offering, and then I can add a little bit more if I want, or add foraging, or add training, training foods, things like that. But I want to start here because if your bird doesn't eat something that you want it to eat, it's probably because it has other food. It doesn't need to try something new. So one of the biggest things when I see, if you have a stubborn bird who doesn't want to eat something, the biggest thing is you pull all the food out of the cage at bedtime. They're not going to eat overnight. They don't get up for a midnight snack. You all know that as soon as the lights go out, your bird brain shuts down, its eyes go, it's like it's asleep. So that the first thing in the morning, you have control over what it's going to eat. It's not going to fill up on something so that it doesn't eat the new food. And, birds aren't going to starve. You're going to give them food later in the day. But, if you want to get them eating better, you got to pull food at bedtime and then offer the things that are important for them to be eating. For example, sprouts, fruits, veg, things like that, whole food in the morning. I don't give any dry food to my birds until evening. And that's where they get a little bit of the mixed seeds, the tree nuts, freeze-dried or dehydrated fruits and veg, things like that. So this is just a really good way to start to get your bird thinking, to get you thinking about how much your bird needs, and how much of the diversity you're offering your bird is actually consuming. So the big takeaway from tonight is no single food should make up most of the diet, no matter how healthy it is. Diversifying and portion control will help your bird eat more diversity and many more different things to, give them a well-balanced diet. And it may even help you eat better because you're bringing the good stuff into the house. I have found that myself. So I never thought I'd like Brussels sprouts until I kept bringing them in the house. And I was like, oh, maybe I should try these. So definitely, ways to rethink how we're feeding can be really helpful. I have groups like the Avian Raw group. We have over 22,000 members now. Very positive, no drama group. I have the Avian Nutrition podcast on YouTube, and that sort of thing. I do have, if you're interested in trying, and I will tell you this, we started biodiversity bird blends to help fund our research. And that was the sole reason, because I did not want another job. I did not want to have more to do, but I knew that we could start formulating things to bring nature into your homes for these birds and get them eating things that they would eat in the wild, or at least mimic that. And so portion of every single sale goes to help start funding our research, it's so expensive, very, very expensive. And we are not getting any funding anytime soon from any other source. So I put a coupon code down there for you. If you would like to try anything, make sure you use that coupon code. And I am happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you so much. This was a fabulous talk. Let's leave that up there for maybe another minute or two so people can write it down, and then I'll have you take that off for questions. And thank you so much for giving us a code. That's excellent.
Oh, my pleasure.
We have a lot of questions, I'm sure. I'm going to start with a few myself. One really quick question. In the Australian blend, you have a flat white wood kind of thing that looks very much like solar wood to me. So I know I bought the blend for my birds. Is that solar wood, and is that actually edible? Because we get a lot of toys, particularly for small birds that have solar wood, and I didn't know if that was something they could actually eat.
Lots of birds eat wood. Lots of birds eat wood. Lots of birds eat bark. That's how they get some of their fiber. And yeah, I put sola chips, whole untreated sola chips into my Go Wild mixes, for the wood component.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that is solar. And while we're talking about the blends, and I know this isn't the easiest thing to do necessarily. Maybe you have a student that would like to do this, but you list the components on your BioBlends website. And I recommend that everybody here go to the BioBlends site. There's tons of really exciting stuff on there to purchase. I bought a bunch of things from the site. I would love to see it vis-a-vis the question you had someone ask you. I would love to see a key on there with the individual component and that little picture of what it looks like next to it, so we know what's actually in the blends, and if our birds like a particular thing, then we know what that thing is. I know that that's just making work, and that's why I said I wonder if there'd be a student that'd be willing to do it. But that would just
we're actually
helpful because
working
we don't
towards that.
recognize these things.
Yeah, we're actually working towards that. It is. I have a photographer, videographer who I work with on other projects, and we're trying to figure out the best way. As you know, there is a lot of ingredients. There's more ingredients in our mixes than you would find anywhere else, and that gets very expensive, especially because we have to bring these in from very specific sources because they're not available. Like you're not going to find rotan nuts anywhere else in the country,
Right.
and that shows because of how expensive it is to bring them in. But when it comes to the individual pieces, we're trying to figure out if we can come up with a graphic that would allow you to at least see the components, the major components. It's really difficult with the greens because we use a lot of dried herbs. And for you to differentiate between little pieces of eucalyptus leaf, plantain leaf, papaya leaf, it's difficult. Like I could say they're anything and you wouldn't know which one is which. So those things are harder, but it's a mix. I mean, we put every green in individually, so we don't get a pre-mix. We have to do it all by hand. We mix everything by hand and bag everything by hand. And so we're looking to see what goes in every single bag as a result of
Right.
that.
But
So
at least for like the big Australian blends or the other ones where you have these large chunks, it's
yeah.
just curious about them. And do you feel like, again, I'm thinking a lot about the Australian ones, by the time they're collected and you ship them here, they're dried and all that, do you feel they're losing much in the way of nutrients by being dried instead of fresh?
Because we freeze dry them. So as soon as we get them, we freeze dry them. And freeze drying is going to maintain about 95% of its integrity, versus just naturally drying them, dehydrating, which they tend to lose up to 50% usually, nutrient wise. So freeze drying is expensive. I have 3 freeze dryers. I'm still paying them off. It's like student loans. They're never going to go away, but they're very expensive. It's a long process. It usually takes me probably a full week to do one batch of Australian because the eucalyptus pods are large. They take up a lot of space, things like that. But freeze drying helps maintain their integrity.
Okay, well, all right. Before we move on to more questions, why don't we stop the screen share and that way we can bring more faces in. And I've saved everything that's on there if if you forgot to write something down. All right, I'm gonna switch to gallery here. So let's see. We have a question about beans. Do they need to be cooked or is soaking overnight okay?
Yep. So the only beans I recommend feeding your birds are mung beans, adzuki beans, and garbanzos, chickpeas, because those can be soaked and sprouted safely. I don't recommend feeding any other beans because they do have to be cooked and you have to basically annihilate them and boil them to death before you can feed them and they'll be digestible. So I don't recommend cooking beans. And I don't recommend feeding any beans that need to be cooked. I tend to just focus on mung beans, adzuki beans, and garbanzo beans. And those are typically the ones you're going to find in bird-specific sprouting blends, for example. I carry the China Prairie line. Those are hands down the best sprouting mixes that I have found. And those have those beans in them because they can be
Okay, put the
safely soaked and
beans
sprouted.
in the chat so if people want to make note of that
Yeah.
as they've been. Garbanzos or chickpeas, those are just 2 separate names about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know there are a lot of warnings about beans being toxic. Years ago, I think we used to see beans in mixes, and I think most or all have been removed because they can be
Mhm.
poisonous to birds.
Yeah.
Do you freeze a lot of your foods? I know you talked about freeze drying. I think the question is probably about freezing in general, like
You can
freezing your
freeze.
top, that kind of thing.
Yeah, you can freeze. I don't recommend freezing beyond 12 weeks. B vitamins in particular start to get lost between 10 to 12 weeks in some foods. So I don't recommend freezing for months at a time, but weeks at a time, totally doable. I usually recommend, pick a day once a month if you want to prep all your food. all your sprouts and your veg and all that stuff, and then just make enough for the month, and then you've got 4 weeks of food. That way you're not going to be losing a lot of nutrient that way.
Yeah, I guess it probably also depends on how they freeze. I mean, many years ago, we used to think that frozen vegetables weren't as healthy as, for example, canned vegetables. But now we know that frozen vegetables are actually that you buy in the supermarket are actually very healthy for you, and they're more healthy in general than canned vegetables. So, and they do
Yeah,
retain their vitamins when they're frozen.
yeah, and if only frozen vegetables that weren't cooked first. So, for example,
Right.
peas and carrots are typically all cooked before they're frozen, which is why they're soft, when they defrost. So, if you're going, it's better to freeze raw whole food than it is cooked food because that just goes bad. It's funny. When like my toucans, when they're feeding their chicks, we first introduce, they only get frozen, like defrosted peas, at for their first few days. For some reason, they love to feed their chicks peas. And it's probably because it's high protein, fiber, and things like that they're going to jumpstart the microbiome in the chick's guts, right? So that makes sense. But what we noticed was the peas came with carrots this time. That was all that was available at the time. And those carrots within hours got slimy, and that's bacteria growth. So those were cooked, and that's why I tend to avoid cooked food altogether is they just go bad faster, and I just avoid them. So now if the birds get any carrots, for example, they get raw carrots. They don't get cooked carrots.
It's interesting you mentioned about rice. Because I think a lot of people, myself included, once in a while might give a little bit of rice. I wouldn't let it sit out, but if you're having rice and the birds want something, you let them take a grain or two. But
Yeah.
I found that pretty quickly in Japan, they're very much against giving rice to birds because they use primarily sticky rice over there. And they've had a lot of problems over there with birds getting crop impactions from eating rice. So, when I posted a picture of my birds nibbling on little rice, I've been yelled at by Japanese people. Don't ever do that. That's really hard. And that's not something we usually hear of here because we tend not to use sticky rice unless it's sushi. But it's kind of interesting. In other countries, they have very different attitudes towards some of these things.
Yeah,
And we have a
doctors,
question from Bethany. How do you recommend transitioning from pellets to whole foods? Do you recommend just doing it or a gradual transition?
Um, you have to get a feel for what your bird will eat. But like I said, removing all food at bedtime because they're not going to eat overnight anyway. Remove all food at bedtime. Introduce what you want them to eat in the morning. Keeping birds is a scientific experiment that never ends. So you are always going to be experimenting with what they'll eat or the form that they'll eat it. I often surprise people when I say, don't dice things for your cockatiel. And they'll be like, but it's so small and I can't put a whole kale leaf in there. I'm like, put a whole kale leaf in there. Put a wet kale leaf in there. They'll bathe in it too. But they like to pick the things. So sometimes the gateway is how you present the food. Presentation can be everything. So with a lot of birds, my cockatoo, one of my cockatoo's favorite thing is banana leaf. So I'll cut a banana leaf off of a tree in my yard. I'll rinse it. I'll drape it over his cage, and he'll spend all day pulling the strands through and eating it. So it really depends on the present, how you present. I tell everybody the best tool in your toolbox could be a stainless steel skewer. Every bird should have a stainless steel skewer. It lasts the lifetime of your bird generally. You can put all kinds of stuff on it. I mean, all kinds of stuff. And one of my favorite things is I get those vine balls and I tuck nuts. I just force nuts into it and I put that on a skewer, and they'll spend all kinds of time trying to get through that damn vine ball. So, just anything you can do to get them eating, and it's experimenting with presentation more than anything. But I will say your birds will eat anything that you want them to eat if you're persistent. But most of the training is you. It's unlearning a lot of what we've done and expect our birds to do. And we gotta give our birds some grace. We tend to give up way too quickly. oh, I put that in his cage, he didn't eat it, so, I'm not going to try again. That's not fair to your bird. Your bird needs time and your bird needs, exposure. So, so, I mean, I had a macaw that would not touch fresh food until I put an entire apple on a skewer, and then all of a sudden, that was the gateway. All of a sudden, he was more apt to eat things, and I hung the skewer in the middle of his cage so that he had to hang upside down and do exercise. Flight is not the only exercise. There's lots of other types of exercise. Most of these birds do not fly most of the day. They're flying from tree to tree. They're not flying for hours at a time. They're climbing around in trees, hanging upside down, reaching at the ends of branches. That's what we should really focus on.
Yeah, I can't say enough about skewers. My birds always have skewers. I use the small one. It has, I'll bring one over. It has a plastic grape on top. I
Yeah,
recommend
yeah,
this one because it has a pointy tip. Some of the larger stainless steel ones, for some strange reason, don't have pointy tips, which makes it that much harder to put vegetables, particularly ones that can break on them. But I put sugar snap peas. My cocktails, my cockatoo go on every day. The cockatiels like the pod. The cockatoo likes the peas inside, but they both work at it. I have an air garden and I grow all kinds of things, but right now I grow little mini bell peppers, the little peppers you get, and my cockatoo has to have a fresh pepper every day. And she likes those better than the ones from the supermarket. I think
sure.
she can detect the difference in freshness, but anything I put on a skewer gets devoured immediately. And then the
Yeah,
fresh leaves too, again, cockatiels, budgies, all of them. Every day my cockatiels get some sort of a large leaf and put in the cage. And the first thing they do is go over and devour them. So presentation is just really important. But I think most birds probably really do love those skewers. They're really
yeah,
very popular.
yep.
Pat asked about tops pellets and want to know what about other pellets and what about if they're colored.
The only pellet I recommend is tops, and there's two reasons. The first reason is it's cold pressed, it's not heat processed. So the nutrients that you're getting are the nutrients that you're getting. The second reason is because there's no synthetic vitamins. You will not see all those big sciencey words in the ingredients. It's all whole food. So the birds are getting the nutrients from the whole food. Um, there's other benefits to it too. I'm a big fan of alfalfa. We've been feeding alfalfa to animals of all kinds for centuries, thousands of years, because alfalfa is so nutritious. So, and birds desperately need fiber in their diet. So that is another benefit. Um, but that's the only pellet I recommend. I don't recommend any other pellets.
Yeah, Melanie wrote, some say that if a bird is scared of new things, it's been suggested to mix 3/4 pellets and 1/4 of what you want them to eat until they start eating more of what you want. So far, this hasn't worked.
Yeah. Um, if birds have access to their comfort diet, meaning a diet they're accustomed to, why do they need to try something new? Right. So that's why I say pull all food in the evening or at bedtime and then focus on what you're going to offer first thing in the morning when they're the hungriest. And that should be your soaked and sprouted items, your fruit, your veg, stuff like that.
Yeah. And Karen Jim want to know, what about yogurt or orange juice?
No dairy, and orange juice is nothing but sugar because I mean, fresh squeezed orange juice, if you just squeeze an orange into a glass, that's different. But all the orange juice that you buy at the store are typically loaded with sugar, frighteningly high levels of sugar. So I don't choose to juice for birds at all because that means that the sugar is left and the fiber is gone. And they need the fiber. So if you're going to offer oranges are great. Slice oranges, give them some pieces. The bioflavonoid is actually that white peel underneath the peel that we typically don't like to eat, but that's got a huge benefit. So, and you'll see birds working in it. They'll like be rubbing it with their tongues on their beak. So yeah, definitely benefits to citrus fruits, but not juices.
And does that go by continent? Because one of the issues is so many of the foods we see are just for parrots, like they're all one monolithic creature, but
Right.
birds in Australia eat very differently, different things than birds in South America, for
Yep.
example.
Yep. So cockatoos and things like that in general aren't going to be huge fruit eaters. That's just not part of their standard diet. So they're not looking for those types of things. I do try to offer more fibrous fruits, but my black palm cockatoo, he does not get a lot of fruit. He doesn't eat it a lot. He eats a little bit like berries and some apple and fibrous things like that. But generally, he loves his leafy greens. He loves his soaked and sprouted items, things like that. Versus South American birds that they do eat a lot of fruit. Or eclectus in Indonesia, they eat a lot of fruit. So, yeah, it would be great if every species could have a very specific species diet. But we don't have enough research to really tell us what these birds are eating in the long term. So we have to make these generalizations. But should you be offering oranges every single day? No. But could it be part of any bird diet? Yeah. And some will eat it and some won't.
Interestingly, my cocktails will eat a little peach and nectarine, but the fruit that they really go bonkers for is fig, and fig
Yeah.
actually is native to Australia, so they
Yes.
do have exposure. Figs have tons of vitamins, tons of fiber.
Mhm.
So I'm not talking about dried figs, obviously, but fresh figs, they just
Yep.
lose their minds over those, and they love to eat
Yep.
those. So if you have an Australian bird, I would certainly recommend fig because that is a native fruit for them and
Yeah.
very.
In Indonesian birds too. My fruit doves go through figs like crazy. So I grow I have a front yard Florida food forest. So I grow all food plants in my front yard, and I have 4 different types of figs so that they have different fruiting times, so that I always have some kind of figs for most of the breeding season, because they go through figs like crazy. But figs are so beneficial to all birds. Any parrot that you can get eating figs, it's beneficial.
Yeah, unfortunately, up here in New England, we don't grow them natively. I mean, there's some varieties you might be able to keep, but it's not certainly not like being in Florida. And then figs are generally only found in the markets on occasion, and they're very
Yeah.
expensive, and they're not very fresh. But
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I would love to have a fruiting fig tree that I could feed figs to my birds all the time. But
Well, I'm telling you, when I was in Chicago, across the street from where I worked, there was an old Greek gentleman, and he had a little sign that he would put out in front of his house that said fig trees for sale, and he sold little baby fig trees because he was growing them and he was bringing them into his house, and he would show me he put the big fig pots that he just put out for the summer into soil, and he was growing figs without a problem. So there's definitely ways to do it.
yeah, wow, that's great. We have a question here. I already know what you're going to say about, but what about animal protein, meats, fish, eggs in moderation?
No, nope, no. The only animal protein that parrots in general need is insect protein, and that's why we feed things like mealworms and black soldier fly larvae and things like that. Um, there is some reports of some parrots eating the occasional lizard or eating the occasional snake, or some things like that, but that is not the standard part of the diet. So they're not eating a lot of meat, by any stretch of the imagination. They're eating mostly insects. And I remember I was with Bonnie Zimmerman, who was doing a talk on the Indonesian Parrot Project, and I said that someone was kind of yelling at me because I was promoting eating insects, and she said, "We literally watch cockatoos peel insects out of tree bark every day. Like that's just what they do." So it's you have to really know and have spent time with parrots to understand what their habits are, and that's insect protein is where it's at, not animal protein.
One of my cockatiels absolutely loved those little pantry moth larvae. He couldn't get enough of those. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
he would eat those all the times. The other birds look at me like I've lost my head if I offer them, but he knew what they were and he loved eating those. So
Yep. Yep.
we have a question from April. How often should we feed taming the flame powder and hemo helper powder? I take it those
So
products on your website.
yeah, hemo helper powder can be offered regularly. Taming the flame powder, I tend to do that like a few weeks at a time, then give them a break now and then. I mean, I have people that have had their birds on it every single day for over a year and they see nothing but benefits. But it with anti-inflammatories, it doesn't hurt to, even if they're natural like what I have there, it doesn't hurt to take them off for a week, keep them on 3 weeks, take them off for a week, put them on 3 weeks, take them off for a week, and then just, see how the birds react. Um, that's probably a good rule of thumb. It's not necessary, like I said, but it definitely helps you gauge what your bird's needs are.
Right. Melanie wants to know, can any parrot have the Australian foraging mixes on your site?
Yes. Yeah. Everything that we include is completely safe for all birds.
Okay, great. And she was also commenting, I think it was back to the pellet discussion. What if they just won't eat the healthy stuff you try to give them?
They will. Like I said, you gotta pull. They don't need to eat things if you have food in there all the time. A lot of us have been conditioned to free feed, where we just leave food in there 24/7 and they always have food. If they have food to eat, they don't need to try anything new, right? So I call it the chicken tender syndrome. If you go to a restaurant and there's children, almost all the time they're eating chicken tenders because that's all they'll eat because we've allowed that, right? Allowed that to happen. It's the same thing with birds. If they have a comfort food that they're consistently eating, they don't need to try anything new. So pulling food at bedtime because the bird's not going to eat anyway overnight. And then in the first thing in the morning, what you give them is the healthy food. They will eat it. Like I said, you have to experiment. It may have to be on a skewer. It may be whole chunks. It may be finely diced, but you're going to have to experiment to see what the best presentation method is for your bird. And think about their natural history. Think about how, like, where do they forage? Cockatiels, African grays, they forage on the ground a lot. So maybe you need to put it on a plate on the bottom of their cage or a bowl on the bottom of their cage that they can't move, things like that. So definitely think about what's my bird's natural history? What do they do in the wild? Because you can't undo, countless generations of evolution, right? Like they've all evolved to eat certain things because that's what they do. And so we need to keep in mind what's the nature of the bird because you can't take the nature out of the bird.
Yeah. Yeah, Melanie is saying how long to wait. That's, I guess, as long as it takes.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't give their, I don't, when I'm weaning a bird to fresh foods, I don't typically introduce dry foods until evening. I'm to like 6 p.m. So they have access to these other types of food. Birds are social eaters. So if you have another bird that's eating in front of them, they'll often start picking up the food much quicker. Sometimes it's um, sometimes it's sometimes like if you look like you're eating it, they may eat it. Sometimes you need to offer it by hand or get them accustomed to just tasting it. But a lot of things like soaked and sprouted items are often a gateway to better eating because they're seeds, right? They're something that they might recognize as food. Where if you give them like a big hunk of a strawberry and they're looking at them, what is that giant red thing in my bowl? Like maybe they don't even know that's food, right? So if they've never seen one before. So sometimes maybe you have to chop it up into little pieces to see if they'll eat it. Or sometimes you can hang it on a skewer and see maybe they'll start tearing at it, that type of thing. So you got to experiment.
Yeah, and I certainly can't say enough about sprouted food. And there's so many ways to do it. You can buy these little sprouting kits. You can buy them on Jason's website or off of Amazon or any place. You can buy wheatgrass seeds in any garden store or anything like that. I know it's come up before, but I find the best stuff to grow it in is coconut coir. So if you buy a kit already, it will come with a slice of coconut coir or most of the time, but you can also just buy coconut coir and cut it up into these little cubes and you soak it in water and it greatly expands. And that's a nice medium, safe medium to grow seeds in, to grow sprouts in, because you'll find your birds aren't just going to eat the sprouts, they're also going to go into the soil. So you want to make sure you do have safe soil. If you just buy garden soil at the garden center, it may be treated with pesticides. Of course, that stuff you shouldn't buy anyhow like that. But so you want a safe growing medium. And I mean, my birds all go nuts over sprout stuff. And having had the benefit of going to Australia, uh, we watched all the cockatoos and the cockatiels and all the other parrots there. What they're eating are these sprouts and the sprouts and the seeds. They're digging up sprouts, digging up corms. That's what they're actually eating in the wild. They love greens. They love freshly sprouted stuff. So another thing I had mentioned in a previous talk of Jason's I attended, but it's a really fun and cool way to grow sprouts is chia. If you get yourself one of those sort of dorky chia pets, you can get them all year round now on Amazon. It used to be you would get them around Christmas time at places like Walgreens and stuff. But chia seed, those are the same chia seeds that people put in their health drinks and everything. It's the exact same thing. You can buy bags of chia seeds. A chia pet is literally just a way to sprout chia seeds.
Yeah.
They make it cute, but that's what you're doing is you're sprouting, and they don't get moldy or filmy or anything because it's in this ceramic vessel with the grooves, and all you do is put water in every day. There's no soil of any kind. So what you're literally doing is sprouting chia seeds, and the birds go nuts over a chia pet. But get one that has like the animal ones because they have a lot of surface area. Don't get one of the head ones or one of the ones that just has a little bit. Get one that gets covered like the cat or the bear or the ram, and you'll see your birds will just go nuts. And they sprout for about a month to a month and a half, which is incredible. And they stay one length, so you don't have to trim them or anything. So I
Yeah,
recommend.
we do, I've got these microgreen kits.
Yeah,
I feel a little like Vanna White showcasing products here, but
yeah,
this is microgreen kit, and it comes with that puck of coconut coir, and you just put that in and it expands and you sprinkle the seeds on it and you have microgreens to feed your birds within a week. It's that
exactly.
quick. And it comes with a little tiny spray bottle. You just spray it once a day, keep the soil, the coconut coir moist. Super easy. And then yeah, the sprouts, we carry the easy sprouter because it sprouts things twice as fast versus the mason jar because there's two-way airflow. So I will never sprout in anything other than that easy sprout jar because you can do everything right in the jar. Everything sprouts very quickly. So I usually soak for 8 hours and then sprout for 14. And then within 24 hours, I'm done. So it's
By the way,
great.
I love the little sprayer. Right now I'm growing
Yeah. Yeah.
my radish seeds, and that little
Yes.
sprayer is a wonderful thing on there. So yeah,
Yeah.
you mentioned alfalfa. I just want to mention I'm not a big fan of buying alfalfa sprouts in the supermarket because you'll get
Oh,
maybe 24 hours. Those turn uh, filmy and rancid very quickly because those are cut. Those aren't actively growing. So unless you have just bought them and they're super fresh, I do not recommend using those for your birds.
don't buy don't buy sprouts from the supermarket. One
Yeah.
of the problems is the bacteria that's particularly pathogenic, like Pseudomonas bacteria, loves the inside of wet plastic containers. So I don't buy pre-cut fruit or pre-cut veggies or anything like that that is in plastic containers. I just grow them myself. Yeah, like that.
Yeah, these are
Super,
actually
super, super easy.
these are your pea sprouts. The only thing I can say
Yeah.
is that they need to put more seeds in with the pea because there weren't a lot, but they've been giving my birds have been giving this a haircut. I mean, it's almost dead, but every day, as soon as they come out of the cage, they run over to this and
Yeah.
eat it. And if you have a grow light, when you're sprouting at home, put it under the grow light. Within 3 days, you'll have sprouts already. That's how quickly these
And
things sprout up.
green sprouts, not yellow sprouts. Because if it's too dark, they come out yellow, which means they're not putting out the chlorophyll, which is you want nutrient rich, and that's why that light is so important because it turns them green. I forgot to mention this. This is a pandanus pod. This is what a lot of birds eat in South Africa, all the way across the Southeast Asia, up into Indonesia. And this thing is like 1 to 2 pounds. It's very heavy, but each of these little things is a pod, a seed pod, and they fall off, and they're super fibrous, like super fibrous. But when we get these, we put them on the website because we're like, you got to get these while you can because they're so fun for the birds. My bird, my cockatoo, loves to pick these off one at a time, and he will take probably, I would say, 20 minutes per pod, just working at it, shredding it, like really working it, because it's hard for him. So, but we give these to all the cockatoos and things like that just to keep them engaged longer. But that's an example of something that they would eat. You're not feeding anything at the grocery store that looks anything like this. This is what they eat. So, high fiber, keeping them engaged longer periods of time foraging is really, really important. So whatever you can do to keep them working, keep them working.
How do you secure that to the cage, or do they use it as like a foot toy almost?
So it's heavy, so they can't do much with it. I might put it in a large dish at the bottom of the cage so that they can roll it around. I do that with whole green coconuts too. I'll put them at the bottom of the cage, and he'll shred them until they're just like the coconut fibers on the outside, and then he starts working on the coconut inside. But it's the same thing with this. I have seen people poke a hole through them and run a small stainless chain through them. I've also seen people put them in. Some cages have those semicircles that you put the bowls in, like the stainless steel bowls. You can sit them in the ring that you would put the bowl in, as a place to store it. But any way that you can get them to work is fine. I've seen people put these on top of their cage. They just throw them up on top of the cage and let the bird work at it through the cage. Whatever's going to keep them busy longer.
Yeah, my cockatoo loves to throw everything to the ground, so it gets difficult to secure anything to the cage. So
yeah.
Oh, Bethany asked about eggs, but I'm sure your answer is going to be no to that.
Yeah, no eggs. Birds don't lay eggs for the reason of eating them. Like that's just counterintuitive. Laying an egg is an extremely significant energy expenditure, so they don't need eggs. If you're going to give them a little bit of egg white here and there, that's not a problem. But there's so many other things that you could offer that will give them the protein and healthy foods that they want. So.
And for those of you who weren't here before we started the meeting, when we were just chatting, again, we're in total agreement that peanuts are not good. Don't give your birds, particularly whole peanuts, because the shells are where the aspergillus spores accumulate and where the aflatoxin can be. So there's so many other foods you can give. Why give your bird something that could be potentially toxic?
Yeah. A walnut a day keeps the doctor away.
And Bethany, you said, can you give the entire thing to the bird? I'm sorry, you asked that a few minutes ago. Now I don't know what that's referring to.
I think it was this, whether it's this or the microgreen kit. Yes, the answer is yes.
Let me, I just gonna get something to show. Where is it?
Yeah. So I tend to give them the microgreen kit when they're supervised. So they don't just like toss it and throw it on the floor, but you can give it to them and let them forage through it.
This is an example of a good type of chia pet. This is I think it's a ram or a sheep or something. This is the kind you want to get that has this huge surface area. And it has these grooves and the seeds just go in there. The only thing I want to mention though, when you're growing seeds, for chia pet or for something else, you'll see recommendations to soak the seeds for like an hour. I soak for a lot longer. So chia seeds, I soak them for 24 hours before I put them on there. That really, when you soak seeds, it's like soaking beans when you're cooking beans. You really want to break down that exterior. So when you're soaking chia seeds, if you soak them for 24 hours, that really breaks down the the hard shell around the seed, and it creates this slime, and then you take the slime and you just, rub it all over there. But the directions say an hour. Don't do that. Don't do 24 hours. Otherwise, you're not going to get good growth. And even the same thing for these like microgreens, some like the peas, for your peas, for example, it says to soak them, I think, for maybe a few hours. I usually just, again, soak them overnight so that I can really break down that shell, and then you get much more vigorous growth.
Yeah, pretty much everything. So, soak overnight is good. Quinoa, you can soak for 2 hours, and that's way more than they need. Buckwheat, you can soak for 15 minutes, and that's all they need. But overnight is just a good general way to do it. Even for soaking nuts, if you soak nuts, they become more digestible. So out of the shell, you just throw some walnuts or pecans or something like that in a some water, let them soak overnight, rinse them, and then feed them to your bird right away, and you've got highly digestible nuts. When it comes to the chia is a mucilaginous seed, which means it produces this mucus, this gel that is so strong they could probably spackle the bottom of the space shuttle with it. It's just so ridiculously strong. So when you do soak them, put them in a wide bowl or something like that. Do not put them in a sprouter. I've had them break through sprouters just from an overnight soak because that gel is so strong. But that's also what allows it to adhere, stick to the chia pets. So, but they're mucilaginous like flax seeds, where they produce this gel that makes them super sticky.
Exactly. I just want to show people, it's always hard with the Zoom background. Here we go. This is the kind of skewer I'm talking about, particularly for the little guys.
Yep.
What's also nice about this particular one is so you clip this in the cage and it opens from here so you can take it to the vegetables. There are some skewers, particularly there are these large stainless steel ones which have a large plastic ball at the edge. They unscrew from the other end, so you have to bring the vegetables to the skewer and flip the skewer upside down to put them on, which is why I like these. They don't last forever. After about 3 or 4 years, the little plastic shell breaks down a little, but they're only like $6 or $7. So I usually, that's the one I'm talking about, where it unscrews the other
this one
end.
is great for birds that, like macaws, that are going to destroy or bend the little metal. Because you can screw this ball on, like put it through the cage, and you can hang it like this so the ball is on the outside of the cage at the top, and then they can move it around and work for their food. Or you can hang it from a hook like this. So that's good for large birds. But we carry these. We have 3 sizes of these, and they're stainless steel. They're strong for being thin, but they're very thin, so you can easily impale whatever you want to put on the skewer. And then it's got a stainless washer and screw that goes on the bottom so that things don't slide off. Nice thick washer. So these, we have small, medium, and large on the website, but these are everything. Like you can do so many things with this. You can make your own toys every day. You could, put all kinds of food on there. I mean, there's just so many things to keep your bird busy.
Yeah, and that large one that you showed first, I actually use those for my cockatoo for toys.
Yeah.
So it's great because I can only use stainless for her toys, because whatever's holding a toy together, she immediately severs. So if it's cord or something, but it's great. I can take it off, pop a bunch of toy parts on, put it up. In 5 minutes, I have a brand new toy. So those are really great for making toys, your own toys for your birds.
Absolutely.
Okay, I know it's getting quite late. I hope I got everyone's questions. There were so many coming in here. If I skipped your question, please unmute, or anybody who wants to unmute themselves and ask the question, feel free to do that. If I missed your question, let me know. I'm hoping I found everything in the chat. If anybody wants to ask any last questions. I did want to say one thing. I loved your comment about the bioavailability. It's so true, because the same thing in humans. If you take calcium pills, you're just going to pee them out. They're not going to help you. In order to get adequate amounts of calcium, you need to eat calcium-rich food. It's because, again, the entire complex of the whole food that's allowing you to absorb the calcium. Just taking a calcium pill is not going to help your bone density at all. It's a total waste of money, and you're just going to pee it out. So that's why eating whole foods is so important, because you can't isolate these nutrients out of context and expect them to have the same effect on health that they do if you're eating the whole food. So I'm very happy that you brought that up.
Yeah, we don't consider bioavailability, and we don't discuss it. Because we just read a label, and if it's there, it must be fine. And it's not. Like, it's just not. So it's hard. And it's hard because people have looked at me like I'm crazy. And I'm like, I'm just telling you what happens. Like, this is the science behind it. This is what happens. So it's difficult, especially because medical doctors are prescribing people all of these supplements. And the supplements may keep you a while, but they're not going to solve the problem long term, right? What's going to solve the problem long term is you get through diet. And that's why you can reverse a lot of diabetes and things like that through diet, because if you just are eating a better balanced whole food diet, you're going to not have to worry about excess sucrose in your diet and things like that. But yeah, bioavailability is really, really important to consider, and we just don't talk about it enough. People don't want us talking about it enough, I should say that.
Exactly. All right. Do we have any last questions or comments? There's a lot of comments in the chat. Thanking you for the excellent talk.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks. And okay. And if not, I want to thank you again, Jason. This was really excellent talk. It's very useful. Really important information. I hope everyone takes to heart with their birds. Because avian nutrition is obviously in its infancy compared to human nutrition, but there's so much we can learn to better the health of our birds. So I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I will be sending the video out once it's posted, and hope to see everyone again next month.
Thank you, everybody.